standards and open AI systems, which adhere to privacy and other applicable laws, do no harm by design, and help to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. The Digital Public Good Standard is this definition made operational. So every open source product that wants to become a digital public good is vetted against the standard of 9 indicators. And against this backdrop, I am delighted to see that a lot of the work that has been done on the guidelines that we are launching today is actually quite well connected to the DPG standards, so there's strong alignment. And today, in fact, is a milestone because we are here to officially release the policy brief Advancing Open Source AI in India, recommendations for governments and technology developers. Let me contextualize this work. India and the world are standing at a critical juncture in developing, governing, and deploying artificial intelligence. The brief that we are launching here today examines the critical role of openness in AI systems to facilitate responsible, community-driven AI development that truly serves the public good. It also discusses barriers and challenges of open source AI and makes clear that openness in itself is not an end, but a means for social and economic development. The policy brief offers concrete recommendations for policymakers and developers alike. And it was jointly developed by the India AI Mission, Fair Forward, Digital Futures Lab, NASCOM, and a group of esteemed experts and an advisory board. This said, it's now my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Bärbel Kofler, Parliamentary State Secretary at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, to contextualize this work and address the essential role of open source AI in strengthening global collaboration and advancing social and economic development. Ms. Kofler.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, I have to say. Well, colleagues, partners, distinguished guests, I'm very happy to be here and to open also this session. Looking forward to the conversation you, as the expert on the topic, will have at the end of that session on the panel. The Advancing Open Source AI in India report is not just another report. We know that quite well. We've seen and we see the proof of the great cooperation between India and Germany. And that's maybe also at the same level important, it is a shared roadmap on open AI development. Our cooperation does matter for artificial intelligence developers in Bangalore and in Berlin, and to the community in the world. Because an AI built in the open enables all stakeholders to benefit from it, and not just a few large tech companies. That's, I think, something we also have to learn in those days. This is especially valuable given the great extent of AI inequality. Many countries regard their progress on AI as an arms race and work on it secretly. But this leaves many, many people in many countries, many societies behind. The numbers are very clear. According to the World Bank, countries representing just 17% of the world's population account for 91% of AI venture capital and 87% of the significant AI models. Yet there is a great economic potential in closing those gaps. The World Trade Organization estimates that the global GDP could rise by up to 13% by 2040 if AI devices are bridged. Trade would be boosted by nearly 40%. Open source AI is a means to democratic technological innovation and overcome AI inequality. It allows developers worldwide to build on the shoulders of those who did the work before without needing million-dollar compute budgets. When training data or documentation are shared openly, both the local and the global community can test systems. detect detect bias, and ensure accountability. This transparency fosters, sorry, I cannot read my own handwriting, fosters trust, without the glasses, it's a challenge sometimes. Fosters trust, and trust is what turns technology into impact. Without it, AI remains unused or contested. From a country perspective, open source strengthens digital sovereignty because it allows each country to adapt AI on its own linguistic, economic, and regulatory needs. And, well, we could ask the question why that is important for the cooperation in between India and Germany. It is of utmost importance for us and for our cooperation. We see and we appreciate very much the India's AI for all philosophy that is well aligned to our own priorities in Germany. We are working for artificial intelligence that is open, inclusive, and representative. Together, we are shaping the future of artificial intelligence with the conviction that AI inequality isn't just a tech issue, it's a power issue. The German government is proud to contribute to the growing open AI ecosystem, in particular through was mentioned Fair Forward initiative. Our goal is open up AI to everyone and to make it drive sustainable development. I would say Fair Forward is a success story, and Indian partners are of course part of it. Let me give you two examples, small examples, what we could achieve so far. We have shared, for example, 16 open AI building blocks for climate action, including artificial intelligence tools that helps to protect forest here, concretely in India, in Goa, against wildfires. Or, second example, we have made 55 AI datasets available as digital public goods, so innovators can build on local AI solutions that help, for example, to reap better crops, track diseases, access government services in local languages, which is of utmost importance. Fair Forward shows why an open source ecosystem is strong. When one partner improves a model or a dataset, everybody can build on it. This stands in stark contrast to a competitive artificial intelligence arms race that would produce only a few winners while leaving very many behind. Well, ladies and gentlemen, open source AI is a prerequisite for more equitable and sustainable development. It focuses on collaboration, transparency, and inclusion, giving power to many rather than concentrating in a few hands. And thus it enables and drives democratic processes worldwide. I think actually that's something the world is needed now. Democratic processes have to be driven forward. The report shows that this is the way to do it. This is the way forward. Let us use it as a common frame to references and grow this community of practice across countries, across sectors, and across languages. Thank you very much.
May I now invite everyone who was part of the process of developing the policy brief. So Dr. Kofler, representatives from GIZ, Digital Futures Lab, NASCOM, and from the working group on stage for the launch of the policy brief and the photo opportunity. Please.
Closer. Thank you very much. Very grateful for that. Thank you.
We will now transition to our panel discussion. We will look at the opportunities and constraints of open source AI in the context of India and the work of the policy group. So may I ask to join me here on stage, please. Amanda Prock, Chief Executive Officer of Open UK. James Lovegrove, Director at Red Hat. Dr. Peter Madsen, Founder and President, ML Commons and Staff Engineer at Google. Mr. Shokalingam, Director, Technology, NASCOM. Ms. Yasha Khandelwal, CEO and Founder of Tech for Biz. And Arushi Gupta, Senior Research Manager at Digital Futures Lab. Yes. Not sure. Solicitor? Okay. So, yes. Okay, we need another photo with Dr. Kofler, I was just told.
I'm sorry.
Please.
Sitting, standing, how do you want it? Yeah, you prefer to stand, yeah. Closer together. And hopefully colorful if you move together. Thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting the panel.
So, now that we've... yes, it's working. Okay, great. So now that we've done the photo opportunities, let's move on to the discussion part, and let's start with the foundations. And that is defining openness in AI, which is not such an easy task. And Amanda, you've done quite a bit of work around this part with Open UK. AI systems are complex with several interlinked components, such as data, models, and weights. And when we begin to unpack what the term openness in AI means, we face several open questions around open data, for instance, the role of open weights and all that. But maybe let's start with why is it actually important to have definitional clarity around this term in the first place?
Thank you very much for having me along today, and I wish you the best of luck with the report. I think that it's really important to understand what openness is because it has values that are fundamental to it, that underlie it, which is how it's achieved success. So if we're looking at that from a community perspective, where when we're building something, we want everybody to be able to use it and share it and rely and trust. And that trust piece is very important because often we move to open source because we want to create access for all. We want to have innovation that everyone can use. And in the last panel, they were talking about a new form of open washing where digital public good, which we've just heard has a very clear meaning, is being misused. Civic tech, various terms of public good are being misused without clear definition, and people are being misled. And I think 2026 in many ways may become the year of the ontology, because as a community, as individuals, we need to be able to rely on what open source is, and we need to be able to take whatever is shared with us openly, use it in confidence, and know we can pass it on for others to use in the same way. And that's fundamental for our trust, but it's also fundamental if you want the innovation to succeed, because that's what's created the adoption of open source at scale. That's why the engineers gather around it. And I think too often when we look at these definitions, we have people who aren't really part of that community building definitions. And what we actually have to do is dig deep into the community to understand why, because we have to have certainty. And if we look at, for example, the laws in the EU, they give certain benefits. They hold open source to a slightly different standard from other technologies. So we have to have clarity in what we're talking about. And I think the way we do that also has to involve very clear, non-isolationist approaches. So we can't be collaborating only as a couple of countries. We need a global conversation around this. And various people have already tried to drive that, but we need to get to this globally accepted understanding that the communities will accept, as well as the policymakers, of what these terms are, so that we have trust and reliance, and we're all having conversations from that same perspective. I'm seeing nodding, so I'm hoping that made sense. Jane.
I think it's back to you, isn't it? You're going to ask the question. Although I'd like to ask myself a question, that makes life much easier. But anyway.
Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, we are here at the AI Impact Summit, right? And this is about global collaborations. This is about bringing people together to exactly have these conversations. So I'm really happy that you brought up this point. I would like to pass it on to Arushi now to discuss what openness can actually achieve. It's often positioned as a lever to reduce dependence on so-called big tech. And Dr. Kofler also mentioned digital sovereignty as one important means that open source in AI can achieve. And from your perspective as a civil society organization, but also working closely with governments, what can openness realistically offer to governments, but also to people, coming from an understanding of digital sovereignty, both for states, but also for people?
Thanks, Leah. Thanks so much for the question. And of course, I'm also going to build upon some of the discussions that we had in the previous panel around resilience and sovereignty. And Amanda, in fact, opened up that panel by saying, I don't like the term sovereignty. And I'm just going to piggyback on it. But before I sort of unpack what sovereignty means and what its connection is with openness, I think it's worth unpacking the marriage, or rather unhappy marriage, between open source AI and the big tech, right? Throughout the work we've done as part of this report, it was a recurring question in terms of what are the limitations in ensuring openness in AI when we know the reality around us, where a lot of the infrastructure, compute, engineering talent is concentrated amongst a small set of actors, right? And even when the entire stack, including models, data sets, are made open, and they increasingly are within the Indian context, can smaller players, individual actors, realistically build models, given that the resources that are needed to build an open source system lie with the people who are not very interested in building the open source system, right? So that's part one. And what we tried to do in this policy brief that you'll also read is we had like 3 symptoms of these limitations. One is, of course, the infrastructural dependencies, but the other is the ability to extract value. So when we have open artifacts, data sets, models, in fact, applications, who and which actor is picking up these data sets and building on top of it? It's more likely than not that it's always better resourced actors, big tech actors, companies who are most capable of sort of using an open data set, adding value to it, building a service on top, and generating intellectual rents off of it, right? So there's also a power asymmetry in who benefits from openness. Coming very quickly to the sovereignty question as well, one thing is that, and something that I also want to cover in terms of Amanda's point, is countering big tech can also lead to the risk of another form of big tech, which is the Orwellian big brother, right? One is big tech concentration or corporate concentration, and the other is state concentration. We, within the global south majority world, do not want either, right? We want a decentralized, pluralistic community of developers, and that has to come in a much more democratized fashion. It has to come from public infrastructure. It has to come from multiple communities of developers being incentivized and collaborating together. And the last bit is also in terms of what would it take us to get there, right? I often see the big tech question being dealt with through the open source channel, but there are many other ways to counter big tech, right? It's not just openness, it's also competition policy, it's also investments in open infrastructures. So that's just the last point in terms of having a very singular connection between big tech and sovereignty. Yeah, back to you, Leah.
Thank you.
So just as you've mentioned me there, I'd just like to very, very quickly respond before you go to the next question. I don't agree with that point about big tech. So the value of openness is that it allows iterative development. And that iterative development is something that means small innovators innovate on top of open source, and that's how they challenge and we build true competition and innovation through openness. And it's evidenced over recent history in software, where we see the big techs buy up all the small innovators in Europe, in other countries, and they do that because small companies are better at innovating in many ways than the big techs are, and that's what openness allows. So I think it's almost the opposite, that big tech isn't a problem when it comes to openness. If the technology is open, small individuals and communities will innovate.
Let's actually hear from a startup founder about this topic, Yasha. You are a founder of an AI company. So what can open source realistically, meaningfully do for startup, for small-sized players against larger tech companies? Is it really leveling the playing field, or how do you experience it from a practical perspective?
So, leveling, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, so leveling partially is correct. Equalized leveling is definitely not correct. So for startups and mid-sized companies like us, I mean, the barrier to entry has been entirely removed, you know. You don't need $1 billion infrastructure requirement. You can take an existing model, deploy it to an environment, ship up an application, and that's there to it, right? So this is amazing when it comes to open source. Now the second part here is we've been able to do tremendously amazing innovation in the downstream part of the application development. The secondary part, which is the foundational layer, is still concentrated in the hands of few. When I say the foundational layer, I mean the pre-training of the base models, designing architectures, retraining them, right? They're pretty much in the hands of few big companies for many obvious reasons, that you need compute-intensive resources, you need proprietary data sets, which you can or cannot get it, and then obviously you need a good R&D lab setup, which is equivalently required to make that happen. So it's pretty obvious that, you know, some companies will have advantage over this. But here is the demarcation, and I sort of want attention to this part. We've seen this trajectory before as far as India is concerned. We know manufacturing and pharma company, when we started there, we were never innovators, or we didn't start as innovators in both the verticals. We started as adopters, right? So you start by adopting something, then you start working towards its execution. So we became really great in the execution for manufacturing and pharma companies. And then slowly we focused and pivoted our understanding towards the upstream, which was R&D. So thanks to open source AI, we can precisely, and I mean precisely, repeat the trajectory here by using what is available with the open source and then start building on top of it to build the intelligence of the upstream. How are we going to do this? This is the most important question. It'll only happen, and I mean that seriously, it'll only happen when the mindset when the mindset of the entire country or the globe changes, that we're not being, consumers of AI. We have to think like producers for AI. And how do you go about producing AI? Goes back to the basics of the maths, that you have to focus on, putting efforts to the foundation layer. Start contributing to the open source community a lot more by pre-training the weights, maybe providing, localized language globalizers, doing a ton of innovation around the architecture. I mean, we have a ton of innovation happening in architecture with JPA model and the likes. AGI, AMI is coming. So start focusing on those core architectures, and then the most important part comes here, is that focus your shift from the downstream technology more on the upstream, so that you're not waiting for the innovation to come here, but you become the source of innovation, right? So, I mean, hats off, open source has been really, really helpful, is how I would like to sum this up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yasha. That is really great to hear, and I love your point also about contributing back. Yeah, please. In fact, contributing back is also a core part of what we do with the Digital Public Goods Alliance and our product owner community. It's something that we really want to strengthen through our work. And I also really, the point that you made around moving basically from access to technology agency really resonates with me as well. I also want to throw in another topic here, James, that is for you. But we talked now about access, we talked about agency. Let's talk also about trust and challenges that may come with open source as well. So I've been part of the definition process of open source AI with OSI, and one of the topics that came up repeatedly, apart from the data discussion, was the risk of open sourcing AI. From your work in the EMEA region, how should policymakers, industry, and civil society navigate this tension between making value creation available through open sourcing versus balancing also the risk?
So what I've noticed, and first of all, thanks for having me. What I've noticed is that any room that talks about open source, it's standing room only. It's a common theme throughout the summit, so there's something going on. And I think also tomorrow's declaration hopefully will reflect that. The importance of open source, and more than that, the criticality of open source and its global nature. And so to your question around the definitions, these established terms and notions which have been around for a long time, I wanted just to riff on what Yasha was saying in terms of repeat the trajectory. So I think from Red Hat's perspective, with the world's leading open source solution provider, is that we'd like to see a repeat of what happened with regards to Linux and the operating system. We'd like to see a repeat of what we're seeing already now in the cloud space and with Kubernetes. And then why not in emerging technologies? I mean, not just AI, but a bunch of other technologies using that kind of open source approach. So I think that was one point I wanted to riff off. The other was, again, these trade-offs. So Amanda was mentioning around sort of values and open washing and legal certainty in the EU. Since we have a strong German contingent here, I think that's quite an interesting reflection. So I'll just make 2 points on that. So first of all, with regards to the EU, we did quite a lot of work on securing an upstream exemption for open source in the AI Act, but it's extremely narrow. And I think partly because open source wasn't fully understood. It's still in the process of being understood. And I think there's an upcoming regulation, the Cloud and AI Development Act, and also the procurement review, where I think, to your point, we want to make sure that there is this global understanding of this community. It's 180 million plus. By 2030, I think a third of that will be in India. But also, it will be as relevant, to your point, Dr., about being Bangalore or Berlin. The two can collaborate and work together and solve problems that actually no single country, region, or company can solve alone. So I think that upstream first approach, sharing in the communities, is absolutely vital. And maybe just an example of that. So with Red Hat, we've got a number of projects, obviously, all of our technologies upstream first. And we've got the VLLM, we've got LLMD. This is all about inferencing engines. It's about making sure that we're not dependent on the hardware underlay. It's about also the point that was made earlier about the energy consumption concerns that we have. And then maybe just closing by, yes, okay, the EU is sometimes naughtily called the kind of global regulator. But in a sense, there is an opportunity. If you get it right in Brussels, you get it right further afield. And I think it's also important that India here also has that exact role, and that was the point that was made in the previous panel. India is actually just as important in the global south on these kinds of terms, in terms of reflecting the realities of what open source actually means and taking leadership there. But again, I'm going to say it could also be just as relevant to the global north too. So getting these kinds of notions and terms entrenched in these kinds of declarations is absolutely vital to kind of really fully unlock the full potential of AI using open source. So back to you, Leah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for this elaboration. And also bringing in, again, global collaboration. I think that is really a common theme here that we see throughout the summit. Let me bring in another perspective as well, and that's related to trust, but at a different level. And Peter, you do also work on benchmarking. And when we debate how models perform, their capabilities, we usually go to evaluations, we go to benchmarks, we go to leaderboards to see which one is performing best. How should we think about transparency, reproducibility, and robustness in benchmarking? And if you could also elaborate a bit more about open versus closed benchmarking and benchmarking contamination, I think this would be really beneficial to understand the important role and also what openness can achieve here.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here today. I think that's a great question. I want to talk a little bit first about the why we should care about measuring things related to trust. This is both a worthy thing to do in and of itself. It's also the chief driver of adoption for AI. Right now, we can build AI systems that can do amazing things. But where they have challenges is in the area of reliability. Will they always give a safe response when asked a hazardous question? Will they always provide security when they're used in an application where they have access, say, to private data or to, say, someone's credit card number? Will they always behave correctly, especially in high-risk areas such as healthcare? Right? It's our ability to build reliable systems that drives trust, and trust drives adoption. So that's why this matters. Then there's the question of how do you measure reliability? And that's where benchmarks come in. And at the Emerald Commons Association, we've done a lot of work with a lot of different people. We have members ranging from Red Hat to Microsoft, so in some sense we're on many sides of the discussion here. But one thing we all have a common interest in is having good metrics, because nothing drives progress like a common metric. Otherwise, you have people shouting at each other with different numbers. But if you can come together and you can agree, this is how we're going to measure something, then you can move it. It's really an amazing thing that metrics do. Benchmarking for AI is a really interesting area to grapple with openness. You definitely want an open and transparent process for defining the benchmark. However, you get into some very interesting challenges when you try and make, for instance, the prompt data set fully open. Because what you will see is you will see people overfitting very rapidly. You can always train your model to be good on the test. It's like if you give a student the exam in advance, they will do really, really well, but that may not be indicative of their actual knowledge or ability. So we've tried to do things like create a bunch of effectively test questions, divide it into a practice test, which we make available, and an official test that we don't, to try and provide openness at the same time we provide accurate results on benchmarks. And we've tried to do that for areas like product safety with the AI Eliminate Safety benchmark, increasingly for security with things like AI Eliminate Jailbreak. We're really trying to give everyone these common metrics that people can use in a fair way, but which still is an accurate indicator. Related to this, I do actually have two challenges for the open community. One of those challenges is there's a question of what we are measuring when we use one of these benchmarks. If you measure a proprietary system, you're measuring something that has a model surrounded by guardrails and other things that try and keep it more safe and secure. And there's been a tremendous flowering of open models. And so one of my challenges for the open community is, can we also see open guardrails and open complete systems so we can measure the performance of what someone could take off the shelf and be ready to deploy to make their company or their venture successful? Right now, we're offering people cars, which is great, but you have to install the locks and the seatbelts yourself. And it would be wonderful to see open systems in the AI space that have those locks and seatbelts. And then we can have an open, transparent, metric-driven path to progress. The other challenge that I would throw out is we've heard people talking about the data too, which is truly crucial to delivering progress on reliability. It's not the Python that's the code in these systems, it's the data. The data is the code. And ML Commons has produced the first AI, let's call it metadata format, that enables people to programmatically access data sets in a common way. And so if you go to sites like Hugging Face, you'll see a little croissant. It's the croissant format, and that's the common descriptor for these data sets. And another thing we'd love to see is a lot of open data tooling, right? How do you help people build good data sets for whatever their application is? Whether it's tailoring to a particular language, supporting an application in agriculture, the ability to reason about that data and to empower people depends on having good tools, the same way that good software tools have enabled more and more developers around the world. So those are my challenges to folks in this room. Could we see full open AI systems that include security and product safety guardrails? Could we see a flowering of open data tooling to help people build more reliable systems and drive adoption? So, thank you.
Thank you so much for this elaboration. And I want to actually throw in another challenge here, and that is benchmarking in the wild, as some call it. What we usually do is we make model evaluations, but we do it in a lab context. What we don't do is to really assess how these systems then perform like in real-world contexts, especially in a global majority context. So I think there's another challenge that the international open source community in AI needs to address to make AI really work for everyone, especially here in the global south. I want to piggyback on what you said around off-the-shelf solutions and basically delivering open components and open tooling that then companies can use, and pass it on to Shokalingam to hear from the private sector perspective. So what is your experience with NASCOM? Where do companies in the Indian context feel comfortable using open components, open models, and where do you still see challenges and things that need to be fixed?
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity. So enterprise adoption, right, in openness, it is in three categories, right? All three categories together. If it is drive speed, innovation, and cost efficiency. If these three things go together, enterprise adopt all these open source tools, right? If you see all the infrastructure component today, like Linux or your containers or your Kubernetes, all are open today, right? And then if your data stack is open, your Kafka, your Apache Spark, all these are open today, right? So even some of the APIs, companies, enterprises are willing to share because of the digital public infrastructure what we have today, right? And second, we all know the predominantly models are open. Predominantly, there are a lot of open source models available. Where we have the closeness, right? The data, right? which is the enterprise data where I have the customer information, which I can't share, my business logic, and the edge which I'm making the profit. So that's the kind of thing which cannot be shared. That's a closed thing today. Second is the, I can say, even DevOps tools are open today, but the DevSecOps, some of those DevSecOps tools are not open today, right? I mean, the guardrail comes under your DevSecOps, right? And ML Commons work on the harms taxonomy, but even some of them are even closed today. So those are the challenges. One, how you build a right if-else statements for your LLM output, right? I mean, that's a big secret today, right? I mean, because your LLM hallucinates, and then it doesn't produce the same result of every iteration, right? Even though you control your top EK values and temperature to 0, it still hallucinates, right? That challenge is still there. So that somebody has to find out a right mechanism to control. Yeah.
So we discussed now opportunities. We also have a table full of challenges. Let's move it on towards operationalizing openness in AI. And that's a question I have for all my panelists here. And just looking at the time there, please be concise in your answers. So if we step back from individual actors, whether it's developers, companies, or governments, or civil society, what do you see as the single most important systemic barriers slowing down the meaningful adoption currently of openness and open source AI? And what would it take collectively to move past that constraint? Maybe what's your one bold move that we need in 2026 to overcome this barrier?
I can say in 2 words: trust readiness gap. That's trust readiness gap. That's one 2-word we can say.
I think this is a super interesting conversation, and I had the opportunity also to read the report last night. And I really welcome the report. It's something that's in line with last week. The European Commission had over 1,600 responses, the most it's ever had in history, to its consultation on open source, which is all public. And Open UK has been working in the UK for the last year with UKRI, doing the same sort of thing. And I think that the biggest challenge, the issue that we have, is a lack of understanding of open source. And it's because the open source community, you were putting out challenges to us, we're poorly represented. We are a community and an ecosystem that is huge, and it's not like going and consulting a single company that has policy people, a lot of money to attend meetings and to always be in the room. And I think, even looking at the experts in the report, the open source community that I know in India, the leaders I know, one of whom was on the last session with us, Mishi, FOSS United, the obvious partners aren't part of that. And it's not a Me Too thing. It's that if you don't bring those people into the room, you will never learn how it works. And whilst the report goes some way towards some of the necessary steps that you need if you want to be successful in open source, it only goes some way. So I think it's a fantastic first step. But there's very clear next actions. And all you have to do is look at China and the way that China has approached open source in the last decade, which has been very public and very clear. And one of the first things they've done is build a national foundation, which I don't think is in your suggestions, and it is in our suggestions in the UK. They've built Open Atom. And you suddenly then have a code-holding organization in your geography. And that's not about localizing. What that's about is engaging globally so that you can be a leader and take that leadership. And I think you're absolutely spot on with that. You have more skilled people than almost any country in the world, but you don't have enough leaders. You don't have enough businesses here. And to build that, you need to have the things that concentrate power. And one of those is having the foundations that hold the projects, that manages the governance of the project and goes out to the rest of the world to collaborate from. And I think there's a lot of gaps in the report in terms of the activities that are needed because you didn't engage enough with that local open source community in India. And I think that understanding of how open source has worked, how it's been built and how it's scaled, it's very geeky, it's very nerdy, it's very specific, but there are people who know how to do it, and they really need to be brought more into the conversation.
I think there was an applause happening there, so carry on. Yeah, so if I could just add to that. So in terms of Red Hat, we are perhaps the largest percentage of revenue R&D, right up there with the pharmaceutical. The difference is we have thousands of patents. They're all unrestricted. All our software is based on copyleft permissive licensing, and that's really important. It means that anyone who uses the software, customer, partner, upstream community, and they modify and contribute to it, they have to then share it back. And that builds out a huge community. So around our products, I think we have something like 7 or 8 million people. You couldn't employ 7 or 8 million people as a company. But these folks are absolutely dedicated to improving that product. They play with it. They're also perfectly entitled to fork it, move it away, create another community. Some clone it, which is a little bit painful sometimes because you want to get them to push back ideas upstream. But nonetheless, then the point about sort of how many people actually are full-time on policy impacting Red Hat or an open source company or the community more widely, I think there are probably a couple of handful. That's about it, right? And so hence that's I think the reason why sometimes regulators unintentionally create these kinds of gaps. It's not a lack of intelligence or a lack of willingness. It's actually on us. Submarines. So we can go back to submarines a second. And then I think but that said, since even though we're the largest on Earth, we would never ever claim to be representative. We're just part of the community, and we work with everyone as equals. And the best ideas generally and genuinely come from everywhere. So that bleeds also into open source AI. I think again we could go out there and say it's this. I think we just have this sort of softly approach because, again, it took many years for the Linux definitions to work. Oh, yes. And I'd say that the minimum criteria is open source licensed model weights combined with open source components. But that's just a starting point. And I think there's more to build on that, and I'm going to hand the mic on. I have to say submarine, apparently.
I actually think your summary was really great. It is push reliability, push readiness. Aim for a turnkey system and not some assembly required to get something that you can deploy in a trusted application. That is significantly enabling to a lot of people, and would love to see the whole AI ecosystem moving forward on trust and reliability as measured by rigorous metrics. I think we have, we look at our own community, our own things we're excited about, but as humans, our greater obligation with something as impactful as AI is to come together and make progress on trust, reliability, security, product safety, to learn how to do these important things as this technology advances.
So I think Amanda has covered everything I would want to speak about, but surely focusing on the upstream is what I'd like to end my part of the discussion with.
I think I'll cover what's left in terms of what we need to go ahead. One of the things that we also discuss in the policy brief is, of course, openness as one of the levers for sovereignty, but also openness as a lever for governance of AI systems, right? Openness also engenders transparency, and what we argue in the policy brief is that when we see within India particularly, there are a lot of public sector AI deployments, and within this context, it's really important to institutionalize openness, whether it means privileging openness through procurement frameworks, whether it means specifically looking at data sets, ensuring that they are well documented, ensuring that their lineage is clearly mapped when they're hosted on public platforms, as well as ensuring that the applications that we are building are, of course, catering to a diverse set of languages, which is automatically something that openness ensures, right? Which is looking at multiple plural languages and catering to them. The other bit in terms of just what we need to sort of really push the envelope to ensure that openness is really embraced is, I think, a move away from self-interest, right? We have within the Indian context, within Global South context, there's a lot of competition in this space, right? As is also seen in the expo, right? Everybody wants to produce and sort of showcase their product, but in the end of the day, it's also essential to have a more collaborative spirit, right? Whether it is in terms of data sets being shared, whether it is in terms of sort of applications and source code being put out and shared. So yeah, I'll end on that note.
Thank you so much, Arushi. And just coming quickly back on the topic of trustworthy AI, I think you're also launching a network on trustworthy AI for the Global South, right?
Yes, and thank you for just giving me a launching pad to talk about that network. So on the 20th, in fact, we, along with CIRAI from IIT Madras, International Innovation Corp, Global Center on AI Governance, as well as ITS Rio in Brazil, are launching a Global South network for trustworthy AI. And the plan there is to really bring civil society organizations across the Global South together for a variety of things, starting with, of course, I know this panel already covered, is benchmarking, but moving towards more contextualized benchmarks and safety evaluations that are more attuned to the realities and the harms and vulnerabilities that the Global South is currently facing, and perhaps would not be catered to by elite institutions in the Global North. We also plan to do a lot of capacity building work when it comes to AI risk mitigation as well as evaluating AI systems. And the third is, of course, knowledge and sharing of frameworks, right? And I know there was a bit of talk around having common methodologies and common metrics, and I feel like the network is also going to work towards ensuring that we're not repeating the similar methodologies and reinventing the wheel every single time. And we know that a lot of the concerns that governments and developers in Brazil are facing is very similar to the Indian context, very similar to what concerns Malaysian and as well as Laos, Cambodian developers are facing, right? So the idea is to really come together as a multi-regional, multi-stakeholder platform.
Yes, thank you. And reusing what others are doing is actually a core open source practice. So that is lived in the network. That's really great to see. I have the pleasure now of wrapping up the session. We talked about many different topics. I think each of them merits a deeper discussion. Let's do that after the session here. I just want to mention a few things, and please forgive me if that is not totally concluding everything that we are saying. So we talked about the challenge of infrastructure and how local developers are accessing technology, and that is one part of the challenge of democratizing AI. It's not only about data, it's not only about models, it's also about looking at the infrastructural component of this. We talked about upstream contributions and ensuring that everyone who is using open source is contributing back to us as well. That's, as I mentioned earlier, also one of the key concerns of the Digital Public Goods Alliance. So happy to explore this more, how we can facilitate and motivate this kind of contributions. We talked about cars without seatbelts and the needs that these cars actually have seatbelts and are shipped in that state to the deployers. We also talked about the lack of understanding of open source AI and the need that there's more building of this understanding with policymakers. And we also touched upon open source as an actual geopolitical strategy for leaders, which I think is, in the Indian context specifically, interesting and timely. Coming back to what Mrs. Kofler said earlier, from Bangalore to Berlin, we need this global collaboration to address any of these challenges, all of these challenges, and to also move the needle from access to agency in technology development. And on this note, I would like to end here. Thank you so much to all the speakers, to the organizers of this panel discussion. It was a pleasure to moderate.